What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, we got Jon Jones and Tyson Fury going at it. We got some Khamzat news, and the BMF belt is going to be contested for again. But I want to start off with the incredible boxing match that happened just yesterday. Vasiliy Lomachenko, Devin Haney, kind of the new generation versus a legend in Lomachenko who had an amazing amateur career. This was as good and close of a boxing match as I've seen in a while. And while I don't think the judges got it right, I was very entertained by the fight.
Yeah, and I wasn't robbed as a fan. I thought it was a great boxing match, and it was entertaining from start to finish. Usually you see a bunch of boxers go in there, and they'll give up the first 6 rounds, and they'll both sort of concede it, and then you kind of have a fun fight for the last 6 rounds. But these guys came from start to finish, first bell to last bell, and gave us an entertaining fight. And I am kind of in the same mindset of a lot of people online. They're saying Lomachenko got robbed, and I don't want to call it highway robbery. I don't really think it was a bad robbery, but I certainly saw Lomachenko winning the majority of the rounds and controlling the fight and just looking like the more skilled, overall better boxer. But you know how the game of boxing is. It's sort of a corrupt business, and if you come in as the A side, you basically got to get taken out on a stretcher to lose your belts.
Yeah, and that's kind of the unfortunate thing, and I see a lot of people saying that in the comments of some of these videos discussing the rounds and how they think Lomachenko won or how they think Haney won, and the general consensus is that Loma did enough to get his hand raised, 115, 113, even 116, 112, but the 116, 112 in favor of Devin Haney is just ridiculous. Devin Haney did not win 8 of those 12 rounds, and that's where the undermining really comes into play. If you want to call it 7-5 one way, 7-5 the other way, call it a draw, that's okay, and I can see there's different perspectives, but for a judge to come out with an egregious scorecard like that, it really does kind of cast a bad shadow over the entire evening. And then other people are saying, Devin Haney was the champion, so you got to go in there and you got to take the champion's head off in order to be the champion. Well, it's a nice talking point. It's a fun thing to say. But the reality is the way the boxing rules are written, the winner of the round gets 10 points and the loser of the round gets 9 or less. So it shouldn't be, well, this guy's the champion, so if he wins a round, it's 10.5 points, or, oh, that was a good round for the champ, he's getting 11 points for that round. It doesn't work that way. The way it works is very clear, it's very defined, and it shouldn't matter who's the champion, who's the blue corner, who's the red corner, who's the A side, who's the B side. It should matter who won round 1. Give him 10 points. Did the loser of that round get dominated? Does he need less than 9 points? Does he need 8 or 7? And those are very rare. Like a 10-8 round, a 10-7 round, in my opinion, the fighter has to be almost finished in order for it to be a 10-8 or 10-7. So I don't think that came into play at all last night. And while I understand the sentiment that, yeah, you got to go really dethrone the champion, that's not how it's written in the rule book, and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Lomachenko did more than enough in most of those rounds to get his hand raised, in my opinion. And when you see the scorecards come in like that, and it just looks like no matter what you would have seen inside the ring, that person was going to, check the box for the person that they feel like they should check the box for. It starts to tarnish not only boxing, but the person that you're giving the win to. Like now Devin Haney is online all day having to see people say, oh, he's a fake champ, he's a paper champ, he was given this win, and he didn't actually beat Lomachenko. And Lomachenko actually rises up in value. I know he doesn't get the belts, I know he doesn't get the title of undisputed world champion that he wanted, but everybody looks at him now as the uncrowned king, and looks at Devin Haney as somebody who doesn't deserve all the belts that he's got. And now you got fighters like Shakur Stevenson looking in saying, like, look, I think Lomachenko won that fight, I think he got robbed, and I would beat Devin easily. And it sort of does start to diminish what Devin Haney did in there, which I thought was impressive. But I just think that boxing gets a lot of things wrong, and when they finally get some things right, like get the right fighters in there to fight each other at the right time, you can have some little issues like that, and like the commentary ruin a great night of boxing, ruin a great fight, and sort of just tarnish the legacy of the great fighters like Lomachenko and Devin Haney.
Yeah, it really does tarnish things. And, this fight did not take place in the Ukraine. This fight took place in Devin Haney's backyard. Now, there were a lot of Ukrainian flags in the stands. I think it was a pretty neutral crowd. I think half the people were there to see Devin Haney and cheer him on, and the other half for Lomachenko. But it was almost a Rocky IV moment. There was a resounding boo when that scorecard was read. So us at home, we're watching it. We think Loma wins the fight, even though it's close. The crowd clearly thought that Lomachenko won the fight, and it's in Devin Haney's backyard. That says something. And then, like I said, the 115, 113, okay, maybe there's an argument for it, but 116, 112, it's just ridiculous. It takes away a lot of the credibility, and it's unfortunate that we're getting these types of results. But I want to kind of move away from that and talk about the fight itself, because this was a technical masterpiece by both men, but especially by Lomachenko. I mean, he was throwing that double straight down the middle with tremendous success. He was creating angles. He was using almost like a wrestling type collar tie to put pressure on the back of Devin Haney's neck and move around him. And this was a brilliant, brilliant performance.
Yeah, and Devin Haney's a very skilled boxer, but he got in there with somebody who is actually, in my opinion, far more skilled as a boxer and just a combat sports athlete. Devin's got a lot of attributes. He's long, he's strong, he can use his footwork, he can jab really well, he can punch really well. But when you see High Tech get in there and he starts to fire on that rhythm and starts to fire on all cylinders, that's like my favorite thing you can watch in all of boxing. When Lomachenko is out, he's pivoting outside of the front leg and he starts to look for his shots, and then unorthodox punches like two power punches, one after the next. And most of the time when you see a combination, you'll see people throw double jabs. You'll see people throw a jab and then slip down and throw two hooks, one to the body, one to the head, or some configuration like that. Rarely do you see people throw twos in a row and have so much success with it. But yeah, Lomachenko seemed to throw that round after round and couldn't help but hit Devin Haney every time he would have thrown it. And if he would have thrown those to the body a couple more times, he probably would have had even more options and opportunities to hit Devin Haney with it, because he would have had Devin looking to block either the body shots or the head shots and not really knowing which one it's going to go for. So I think that's one of the things that stuck out to me as one of the most successful attacks that Lomachenko had last night. And you started to realize about round 8 or 9, Devin Haney started to look at his corner and say, guys, what do I do? What am I doing? What is he doing that I'm not noticing? Because he's hitting me with this all the time and I don't have an answer for it. And when you have a fighter asking those sorts of questions, that tells you a lot about where he thinks he is in this fight. And while his corner is telling him come round 8 and 9 that you're winning this fight, you just need to get to the end and you've basically got this thing won, I'm of a different mindset of that. First of all, I thought Lomachenko had the advantage going into the championship rounds 10 through 12. But also, if your fighter's asking you these sorts of questions, he doesn't have a lot of confidence in himself. And I don't think you should push some false confidence in him that like, hey, you're winning these rounds, you can just start to coast. Because Lomachenko proved to us last night, and he's done it many more times before, that he's one of the best finishers in all of boxing. When it comes time to fight the championship rounds, he can really elevate and show that gas tank that he's got and show that, level of cardio that he has. It's kind of unmatched. And I just think it's really impressive. I think Devin Haney looked really good in there, but Lomachenko to me stood out as the better fighter, and he came with some really crafty veteran style moves that were really impressive to watch.
Yeah, and the corner advice sort of situation and sort of blowing smoke up the skirt of their fighter, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, obviously the guys know they're mic'd up, so they know that the people at home are hearing what they say, and maybe there's something that they want to portray, a narrative that they want to try to create before the fans and the audience creates their own narrative. But the look on Devin Haney and his father's face as the scorecard was being read was not a look of we got this in the bag, extreme confidence. It was a look of we're very concerned, and the Loma side was very confident that they had won that fight, as was most people that watched that fight last night. But all in all, I think we got, as fans, an incredible match. We got 12 rounds of awesome boxing between the new school, the old school, and it was a great night of boxing. In general, the whole card was pretty good. There were some great fights from top to bottom. It's just these scorecards tend to cast a nasty shadow over things, and it's unfortunate that happens.
Yeah, and the commentary doesn't help at all. I mean, you see these guys, Andre Ward and Max Kellerman and Bradley, and all these people that are supposed to be experts, and I do consider them experts in the sport of boxing, but they're just biased. They're so biased, and they literally won't shine up a fighter at all if they think that the A side or the person who is, considered the reason the card is being put on is supposed to win, and maybe they're not getting the advantage in the rounds. Like, there were many times where Lomachenko put together like 3 and 4 punch combinations and snapped Devin Haney's head back, and it's crickets from the commentary booth. They're not saying anything. And then
all they said was, "Oh, Loma's feet are out of place." It's like, well, okay, his feet are out of place, but Devin Haney's getting tagged. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, these are boxers that are probably in the Hall of Fame, and they've had great careers themselves, and they're just like criticizing Lomachenko, and then anytime Devin Haney throws something that sort of lands, they're like, "Oh man, big shot by Devin Haney. A couple more of those, and he's won this round." And I'm just like, I'm taken aback by that sort of stuff, because that is one thing that actually tarnishes boxing even more and almost makes it unwatchable, or unlistenable, I should say, more so than the judging. Because if you've got corrupt judging, we've had that forever. We kind of know to expect that. And if you want to, beat the A side, you kind of have to knock them out. But if you have these commentators that are just so biased, it really does start to make you wonder, like, are they being paid to talk like this and talk so negatively about the B side? Or, you never see that sort of stuff in the UFC. And I know there's a lot of comparisons drawn between the UFC and boxing. And in my opinion, the product of the UFC is just light years above where boxing is. I know there's still some great fights and great fighters in boxing, and I watch it all the time. But as far as the product goes, as far as just, the commentary goes, the UFC is so far above it, and you're never going to find out, even if, Joe Rogan or John Anik or Daniel Cormier, even if any of those guys on the UFC's roster for commentators has a favorite fighter, you're not going to be able to tell through their commentary.
Yeah, and DC was the only one that was the minor exception to that, and he's kind of gotten that under control. But I think with DC, he's just more of a fan than anything else. His inner fan comes out in full force when a big fight's happening. Right. But you're totally right. Joe Rogan and Jon Anik are as down the middle of the road as you could possibly be. They're totally unbiased, and they give commentary as they see it. And so that's really something to marvel. It's really something that we take for granted, as you and I, who are more so MMA fans than we are boxing fans. It's something we take for granted until you go and watch a big boxing match and you're like, man, this commentary is night and day different from what we are used to when we watch the UFC. Speaking of the UFC, I want to talk about a couple of big fights that have just been announced. And I think in large part, this was on the heels of the Francis Ngannou announcement. Dana White was like, we're going tit for tat here. Francis is not going to have a big announcement, and the UFC is going to be cricket. So it looks like the BMF belt is going to be contended for again. Jorge Masvidal is now retired, but the belt is clearly going to continue on. I love Justin versus Dustin. I think it's a different fight than it was in 2018. Justin Gaethje is still the Justin Gaethje of old, but just a touch more refined. He's not going to go out there and just throw complete caution to the wind. He looked very technical in his last couple of fights. His boxing under Trevor Whitman has come a long way. So I think that's going to be an awesome fight. Want to get your thoughts on that, and then I want to talk about Khamzat versus Usman.
Yeah, which is a super exciting fight. But if you're talking about the BMF, I don't think there's two guys on the roster right now that fit the script better than those two.
100%.
And I love that Dana White did that. The biggest mistake Francis Ngannou made an announcement that he was making an announcement and gave a date for it, because Dana White is one of those guys. He's a businessman, and some people might call it petty, but if he's always got bullets in the chamber, and if you're, trying to compete with him in any sort of way, and you got under his skin like Francis Ngannou did, he's going to give you something to deal with. He's going to give you something to compete with. And, Francis obviously had some big news. He said he's going to the PFL, and, that sort of fell on nothing once Dana White jumped in and stole every single headline with all these big things. Everybody wants to hear about what Conor McGregor's up to. So we got the Ultimate Fighter on its way. And I know that wasn't really the same day, but that's some big news that's happening.
He's back in the USADA pool now.
In the USADA pool. Khamzat Chimaev, everybody wants to know what he's doing, plus Kamaru Usman. So there's all kinds of things going on, and the UFC usually will keep things bottled up until the moment's right. But this is one of those scenarios where they're like, we're letting it all out.
Rapid fire.
Yeah, somebody call Aljamain Sterling, get the contract between him and Sugar Sean signed right now so we can announce it. Somebody call Khamzat Chimaev and figure out if he's down to fight in Abu Dhabi at 294. Somebody call he just decided on very short notice that we need to get all this going so we can steal all the thunder from Francis Ngannou. And I don't think it's just him going after Francis. I think it's him trying to go after the PFL and all the other organizations that are trying to compete with the UFC, so he can set the tone and set the example as the premier promoter in the sport. And, you know, when you talk about the BMF, that's something that I really, really did enjoy when they brought it out. I had no idea I wanted to see a title for the BMF be contested. And then when you think Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, it's like, okay, well, they're never going to fight for a UFC belt, but there deserves to be some sort of belt on the line.
Right.
And, you know, I could do without The Rock being the one giving it to him. I think there's other BMFs out there that could probably, you know, hand over that belt better than him. But once we saw that happen and they're like, all right, we're not doing it anymore, I was a little bit bummed. I was like, no, I like this. And I think it should only be one belt. And the fact that it started at 170 is perfect. That means it can go either direction in weight classes because there are smaller guys that can beat bigger guys. And then, of course, there's bigger guys that can beat the smaller ones. So you never know. That BMF belt could venture all the way down to flyweight one day. And, of course, it could go all the way up to heavyweight. Now, if it gets to heavyweight, I don't really see it coming back down the list of divisions. But it started at 170. Now we've got it at 155. And I think this is the perfect matchup to bring the BMF belt back for. And I know we've seen this fight happen before, but you never know what you're going to get with Justin Gaethje, and you never know what you're going to get with Dustin Poirier. But one thing I know for sure is Justin Gaethje is the fighter that we all wanted to see Justin Gaethje be. He was just content with being the most entertaining, the highlight reel, the most fun fighter, and your fighter's favorite fighter for the longest time. And we grew accustomed to that. But I think he does now realize that he wants to be a UFC champion. He doesn't just want to be the most entertaining fighter in the world. And to do that, you have to be a little bit more tactical, a little bit more calculated. And he's showing us that he has the skills to be the best fighter in the world. And he's not willing to just throw caution to the wind every time on his way to the belt. He's willing to do what his coach wants him to do, stick to a game plan, and get his hand raised.
Yeah, you know, after that win against Vasiliy, I was fully on board with the new and improved Justin Gaethje, and I don't think it'll be an easy of a victory this time around for Dustin as it was the first. I honestly think it's a 50-50 fight, and I love the BMF belt. I'm super excited that they're bringing it back. The only thing I would have done a little bit differently was have Jorge defend it a time or two. You know, there's certain fights that Jorge had after the Nate Diaz fight that they could have made that maybe would have made sense to bring the belt back out, but they never did. So they kind of shelved it, and now they're bringing it back out that he's retired. I would like to see if they're going to try to improve and keep this BMF belt around. Don't just let it be contested between these two gentlemen and then put it away until both of them retire and bring it back out again. Whether Justin Gaethje gets it or whether Dustin Poirier gets it, their next fight could definitely make sense to put it back on the line again. So let's keep doing that. If we're going to run the BMF experiment, let's run it all the way to the end. And I think that we should do it, you know, every time Justin Gaethje, if he wins, whoever he fights, we should keep that belt in mind and try to make his opponent a worthy opponent to contest for it. Same thing with Dustin Poirier. So just my 2 cents. I love that they're bringing it back, but I hope they keep it going in rotation and make it be defended by whoever holds it.
Yeah, and I think there's one fighter in particular that wants that belt, and the UFC wants to see get that belt. And with the two fighters that are fighting for it next, having their opportunity, there's just a perfect opportunity because the world is a better place when Conor McGregor's fighting for a title. And there's really no way the UFC can have Conor McGregor fight these days and it not be for a title because he is the biggest star by far in all of combat sports. And he has to close out the show. But the UFC has a business model, and that is that the last couple fights of a pay-per-view are going to be for a title. It's going to be 5 rounds, and there has to be some weight on it. But Conor McGregor hasn't fought that recently, and he also, you know, hasn't won much that recently. So I think it's more important for them to have a belt, whether it's the undisputed UFC belt or one that they just made up and people are really starting to cling to. Conor McGregor needs to be fighting for a belt, and that way they can justify putting him as the very last fighter to walk out on the top of the bill. And it won't feel like they're gypping some of their champions. You know, if they put him on the same card as Izzy Adesanya, as much as I love Izzy Adesanya and he is a main eventer, he's not going to walk out after Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor has to walk out last or second to last if the person happens to be ranked higher or already has the belt. But I do think that Conor McGregor is one fight away, and he might not even have to fight Chandler. You know, there could be some issues, and his extension with the USADA pool thing could push Michael Chandler into a different fight. You know, if I was Michael Chandler, I'd hold out, but crazier things have happened for sure. And he might see what happens between Dustin and Justin and want to get that revenge 4th fight with Dustin, or get that dream matchup that all UFC fans have wanted to see for a long time, which is Justin Gaethje versus Conor McGregor. And if there's a belt on the line, like the BMF belt, you know Conor McGregor's in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they would love to do in an ideal world is get some sort of belt around his waist. But the issue is he competes at 155, and looking at his body more recently, probably 170. Well, Islam Makhachev sitting at the top of 155, and Rocky Edwards is sitting at the top of 170 with a literal pool of sharks swimming around him. So who knows how long Rocky will be able to even hold on to that belt. So it's a tough uphill battle for Conor McGregor to get an undisputed belt in a weight class. And so the next best thing would be the BMF belt. And like you said, Justin Gaethje makes perfect sense to fight Conor because that's a striker's dream matchup. It's very exciting, could go either way. Him and Dustin Poirier have a long history. This would be the fourth installment, but the last one kind of ended in a way that none of us would have hoped. So there's room to have that extra fight with Dustin in there. So I think it's awesome. Another guy who considers himself to be a BMF is Khamzat Chimaev, and who knows, he may compete for that belt one day himself. And I think Kamaru Usman is a very overlooked BMF in his own right. He's ready. He's look. He could have called it a day. Kamaru easily could have been like after the second loss to Rocky Edwards. You know what? I'm just under George St. Pierre for the best welterweight of all time. I'm going to call it a day. I'm a millionaire. I'm sponsored by all of these great companies. I was in the Black Panther. I could go into movies. I can do whatever I want. The world is truly Kamaru Usman's oyster. Yet he's continuing to fight, saying that he wants to fight the hardest guys, wants to even potentially go up to 185 to fight Khamzat, because Dana said that Khamzat's next fight will be at 185, and he's cool with the Usman fight, but Kamaru needs to come up to middleweight. So, I think Kamaru in a lot of ways gets overlooked he doesn't have to fight a guy who's never held a belt before. He doesn't have to fight a guy who's brand new to a division. None of that. But he's choosing to do that because that's who he is. So props to Kamaru. I do kind of think Khamzat would be have an advantage in that fight, but I think it's a great fight, and it's not a gimme for either man.
Yeah, Usman hasn't looked the same ever since he did take those losses from Leon. And Khamzat Chimaev is just one of those guys that we got to see him fight more often, because every time he's in there, it's just the most exciting thing. There's hasn't been a fighter like Conor McGregor in the UFC before or after, but as far as the big fight feel that I get, Khamzat Chimaev is a close second. He's right there. Him and Sugar Sean is starting to get there. There's a couple of people that are really starting to make us feel that certain way that Conor made us feel on his rise to the top, and Khamzat Chimaev sits at the top of that list. But when you see somebody like Usman, who's been the champ, he's beat everybody on his way up. He is a nightmare for a lot of people. He probably sits in the front of a lot of people's minds as, their most difficult day in their entire life because they had to fight him. So I think that he more than deserves a shot on the BMF's short list of fighters. And plus, he's great teammates with Justin Gaethje. So if Dustin's able to win, and he might want to go get some revenge, because as it sits right now, he's not going to get another title shot at 170 for a little while, and that's okay. He doesn't need to go get that belt again, but he's also not going to go to 185 and contest for the belt as long as Izzy's there. So he might as well look in a different direction and go for this belt that doesn't really require a merit, or it's kind of one of those things that's just subjective. Dana can decide whether or not you're a BMF, and the fans will sign off on it if they agree, and everybody would say that Kamaru Usman certainly is. And that's another way he could fight for a belt. And I think there's great opportunities for him. I think him and Conor would make for a lot of fun. I think, him and Khamzat would make for a lot of fun. So there's plenty for Kamaru to do. I think it's very impressive that he wants to go after the people like Khamzat Chimaev. He could probably settle into fighting a bunch of, former monsters, guys that are on their way out, but they're a little bit older, a little bit closer to his age, and he could have some really fun matchups that the fans would love. But instead, he wants to go to the very top of the mountain, fight the best people in the world, and I commend him for that.
I love it. And he's going to go to Abu Dhabi. Yeah. Kamaru's loved all over the world, so it doesn't really matter. But Abu Dhabi, especially for the Muslim fighters, is kind of their backyard. They go there and they get a resounding bump from the crowd. So to go up to 185 as a great former champion like Kamaru, to go up to 185, go into Abu Dhabi and fight Khamzat Chimaev, potentially the best prospect the UFC has right now, this young, hungry warrior, I give him serious credit. Now, I do kind of think that Khamzat will get the better of Kamaru, and I think that fight needs to happen soon. Like, I think the date in the fall is the perfect date for it, because if you start to get more time pass and all of that, Kamaru's getting towards his late 30s, then it becomes not as competitive and not as fun. So I think if they're going to make Boers versus the Nigerian Nightmare, it needs to happen in the fall, and it looks like that's when it will happen. And I can't wait for it. Now, looking at a fight that will never happen, but it's certainly being talked about back and forth on Twitter right now between the two gentlemen involved, and that's Jon Jones and Tyson Fury. They're kind of going back and forth. And this all spawned from Joe Rogan saying that, something to the effect of, Tyson Fury's a great boxer, but somebody like Jon Jones would dismantle him in less than 30 seconds in a real, quote-unquote, no-holds-barred fight. And then Tyson Fury came out and said, not so fast, Joe Rogan. If I'm locked into a room with any man on planet Earth, I'm the one that's walking out. And that kind of alludes to, if I'm locked in a room, there's no rules, there's no cameras, no nothing. So Jon Jones was like, I don't think so, big guy. While you're the best boxer in the world, if you were to come into the cage, you would stand no chance, which is absolutely true.
Right.
And then Fury did backtrack a little bit and was like, no, I'm not a cage fighter, I'm a boxer. If you want to come in the boxing ring, then I'll kick your ass. So it's like, okay, I think Fury might get it. Like, look, if you're talking about a no-holds-barred sort of situation, there's probably no person on planet Earth that could beat Jon Jones. But a boxing match, John's like, yeah, I'm not arguing with you about that. You would obviously beat me in a boxing match, and it wouldn't take that long for you to do it. But you come into my realm, and it's a whole different thing. I'm the biggest Tyson Fury fan you'll find. Tyson Fury doesn't last 30 seconds in an octagon with Jon Jones.
Yeah, no, that's an awful match. I mean, Cyril Gane is a legitimate, UFC top contender. He's, gotten to the interim belt before, so he knows a thing or two about fighting MMA, and he looked like he had no business fighting Jon Jones just a couple months ago. Jon is a different animal. MMA is a different animal. And Joe Rogan said, if you lock him in a room with another man, we're not talking about Queensberry rules. We're not talking about you can only punch with 8-ounce gloves or 12-ounce gloves. We're talking about if we lock you in a room, who's coming out? And every single time that's going to be Jon Jones. You could put him in there with every single boxer that's ever lived on this planet, and Jon Jones gets out of there easily unscathed. Tyson Fury is an awesome fighter. Like you said, there's not a man alive that can beat him in boxing. I agree with that. There's other boxers that are more skilled than him, but with his size and reach and power, no boxer could beat Tyson Fury, in my opinion. And I don't think that there's ever been a heavyweight boxer in the world that would beat Tyson Fury. I know that sounds a little crazy, and people probably get on to me about that, but I think Tyson Fury is the greatest heavyweight boxer that has ever lived. And he's starting to prove it. And if he continues to beat the list of fighters that he's been beating, the biggest names that boxing possibly has to offer him, I think he's going to cement himself as the greatest heavyweight of all time. He won't go down as the GOAT like Muhammad Ali because he already existed. He's not going to go down as the scariest fighter in the heavyweight division because Mike Tyson already existed. But as far as the skills of a boxer and a heavyweight, I think that Tyson Fury is the most skilled there's ever been. That being said, boxing's totally different than MMA. If you're talking about real fights, if you're talking about unarmed combat, you're not talking about utilizing boxing skills to win those fights. You're talking about using every set of skills that you can possibly have, and Jon Jones has every single one of them sharpened, refined, and ready to go. Whereas if you had a couple of boxers get into a street fight, within 30 seconds, they're going to be doing non-boxing techniques.
Right.
They're going to be resorting to what little bit of, primal instincts they have to try to maneuver into some form of mixed martial arts techniques, which is going to look pretty funny. But Jon Jones has been working that sort of stuff his entire life, and you're not going to beat him if you haven't been training just as long as him.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it was a while back when Shakur Stevenson was kind of trying to find his way, and he was still a young man trying to navigate fame and fortune and all that. He got into a street fight, and somehow it got recorded. I think it was at a gas station, if memory serves me. And I was blown away by how untechnical he looked.
Yeah.
You see, Shakur is one of the best skilled boxers in the world right now. He got in the ring last night and said, look, I'm ready to take on Devin Haney, and I think I can pick him apart. When you have that type of confidence, you certainly believe in your skills, and he does have them. But in this street altercation, he looked like any other person getting into a street fight for the first time. He was swinging these wild punches, stuff he would never do inside of a boxing ring. Maybe we can even pull that video up and put it here so we can have a visual aid as we're talking about this. But yeah, it actually was very surprising and eye-opening to me to see how ill-prepared a high-level, champion-level boxer was in an actual street fight. So that being said, boxing's my second favorite sport. I thoroughly enjoyed Loma versus Haney last night. We spent the majority of this video talking about that fight. But don't make the mistake that a great boxer is a great fighter. And that's the mistake that Tyson Fury is making. Jon Jones is a great fighter. Tyson Fury is a great boxer. And if they were to get locked in a room together, Tyson Fury would very quickly figure out what it means to be a great fighter, not just a great boxer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And boxing is a sport. And MMA is a sport as well. But it is much closer to an actual fight, a street fight, if you will, than boxing is. You know, boxers get in there and then every time they clinch up, which happens all the time in boxing matches, the referee, distances them and they get to go back at it from a boxing range. MMA, that's basically where half of the fight gets started once you get connected with the fighter. And if you don't know what you're doing when it comes to the clinch, when it comes to the wrestling, when it comes to the grappling, and then when it comes to getting on the ground, you're like a fish out of water and you have no business in there with somebody who's been training a little bit. If you have somebody who's a UFC champion or the greatest of all time like Jon Jones, it's just a whole nother ball game. You don't even realize what you don't know. It's so foreign to you if you haven't been there and done that and walked that walk. And that's why I think the fact that there's still people out there that think that MMA fighters wouldn't beat boxers in a fight is actually laughable. Like, I can't believe that even after 30 years now, we're in the 30th year of the UFC's existence, there are still people out there that will see like a boxing match and be like, oh man, my money's on the boxer versus this MMA fighter, even if they fight in the cage. I see it all the time when people talk about Tank Davis. They're like, I'd love to see Tank fight in the UFC because I'd love to see him in there with like a Sugar Sean O'Malley because, Sugar Sean would get cracked one time and he's going to sleep. It's like, first of all, Sugar Sean's one of the best strikers we have in MMA, and the reason his boxing doesn't look as good as Gervonta's is because the range and the style of fighting required for MMA is 100% different than the style of boxing for boxing. Sugar Sean O'Malley would destroy Gervonta Davis in a fight in a matter of seconds, and it wouldn't even be kind of competitive. He's never conditioned his legs for leg kicks. He's never conditioned his body for body kicks, and I can assure you that there's not one fighter in Gervonta Davis's weight class that can punch the body as hard as Sugar Sean can kick the body. On top of all that, Sugar Sean's very good on the ground, and plus all the grappling and the takedowns that he knows, it wouldn't even be kind of close or competitive. So hopefully that narrative can switch sooner than later, but you never know. These boxing fans, they're going to live and die on that hill regardless of what you show them or tell them.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, if you're worried about Ryan Garcia being able to fully rehydrate himself with 8-ounce gloves, God forbid you get kicked in the head by Sugar Sean O'Malley with a massive shin bone, because that's a whole different story, a whole different level. And it's, I think this narrative has come about because a lot of older MMA fighters that specialized in grappling, Ben Askren, who's got a fake hip for God's sake, Tyron Woodley, who has a wrestling background with kind of an overhand, heavy-handed puncher, but he's not a boxer by any stretch of the imagination, and he's 40 years old, come over and fight these guys like Jake Paul, and they're like, oh, look, there's a great MMA fighter that lost in a boxing match. It's like, well, you took and you hand-selected MMA fighters that weren't known for their striking, made sure they were over 40, preferably with a fake hip, and then made them punch only, which is not their specialty. It's like, if you can't see through that, then I don't know what to tell you. But make no mistake about it, MMA fighters beat boxers in a real no-holds-bar fight 100% of the time.
Yeah, and the reason MMA fighters go over to boxing is because after getting kicked and punched and choked out and submitted for years and years and years, they look at it as a little bit of a part-time job to go,
right.
All I got to do is go throw some hands, and there's no threat of the takedown. There's no threat of leg kicks or head kicks or, anything like that. I'll go box and I'll make some more money than I made in MMA, and I'll ride off into the sunset, and I don't really care about what my boxing record says because I'm only going to do this a couple times for a big paycheck. So, yeah, I think it's entertaining. I hope the MMA fighters still go to boxing. I'd love to see some boxers come over to MMA, and if Dana White can start to incentivize them with some big paychecks like they're getting in boxing, I see no reason why they don't come over and sort of represent for their sport, because there's a lot of people saying that boxers would win MMA fights against MMA fighters, and I'd just love to see it get contested.
Me as well. We will jump off the soapbox now and wrap up. But guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.